Hey guys, in this video, we will learn more about data types and variables in Python. Let's first look at the concept of variables. A variable is basically a placeholder, and it's used for storing some value. That's effectively what it does. So we have this placeholder. We give the placeholder some name, for example, num, and it is used to then store a value. And you need to take note that the variable can only store a single value. So when you decide to put a second value into it, the previous value is lost. In many of the other programming languages, variables are declared in a particular section. But in Python, this is not the case. A variable is created the moment you assign a value to it. So, for example, you can say num equals 10, and the variable is created at that stage, and Python will look at the value you're putting into that variable, and it will assign a data type to it. So in this case, the value 10 is assigned to the variable num, and this variable will be of an integer data type. When you are naming your variables, make sure you don't have any spaces. Do not start with a number. You can have numbers in it, but do not start with a number. And if you're using any special characters, make sure you use the underscore. For example, you can create a variable num1, num underscore 1 equals 10. That is acceptable. But don't use any special symbols like the dollar in your variable name or the hash for that example. Variables in Python are case sensitive. In other words, if you have a variable called num, and if you have a variable called num with a capital letter N, these are seen as two different variables. And then if you decide to create another variable, num, all capital letters, so each of these are seen as different variables. Here we are now using variables and we are storing values in these variables. So we have this variable x equals 50, and the value 50 is stored in the variable x. Let's ignore that for now. And then we've got y equals zama, and here we are using quotes. So a different value is now stored in y. So when you say print x and print y, printing x will print the value 50, and printing y will then print the value zama. It's important to take note that if you have a variable x equals zama and x equals zama here, you are dealing with strings. These are strings, and when you're working with strings, you can use double quotes or you can use single quotes when you're working with strings. So that's the point that this segment is trying to illustrate. It's simply saying that when you are working with a string, you can use the double quotes or you can use single quotes. Python treats both of them as strings. Coming back to this example, here we can see that x had the value 50, so we know that is an integer type, and then we have y, which has the quotes, and anything that has quotes is treated as a string. And the note here is simply the point that I just made. If you can use either double quotes or you can use single quotes, and both are regarded as string data types. Let's look at this example. In this particular example, I've got a variable x, and we are storing the value zama in it, which means that x is going to be a string, data type variable, and we are saying print hello. That's just a message in my print statement, and then I'm printing the variable. And you'll notice when you want to separate the message and the variable, we make use of the plus, which means to join the message to the variable. And here we've got print, which is the message hello, and x, which contains zama. So the output there will be hello zama. So that is how that segment will display. If we look at this segment here, we now have x equals hello zama. So that's one string variable. And then we've got y, how are you? That's also a string variable. So x contains the first part, y contains the second part, and then we've got an expression where z is another variable, and it takes your x plus your y. So it adds these two strings, hello Zama, how are you? And it combines them and it stores the result in z. So when I say print z, that is now going to print the value of x plus the value of y. So the value of x is hello Zama with a full stop. And then the value of y was how are you? And also take note that there was a space that was left in the y before how are you was put into the string. There's a space here. So when it's going to be displayed, there will be that space before it displays how are you. If you did not display the space, or if you did not leave the space, then when it's displaying, it will display hello Zama, full stop, and then the H is going to appear immediately, how are you? So there'll be no space between the dot and the letter H. So just keep that in mind when you are joining or working with strings. In this case, we've got x, which contains the variable. X is the variable that contains the number 10. Y is another variable that contains the number 20. So if I have print x plus y, in this case, it will output 30. So it's going to evaluate 10 plus 20. It will get an answer, and that answer will be evaluated to 30, and that will be displayed. If we look at this segment here, we've got x, which has the value 10, and we know that x is a number, an integer. We've got y, and that is a string. So x is an integer, and y is a string, and we are attempting to now do a calculation because we've got x plus y. And what do you think the output in this case would be? Well, x is 10, y is Zama. Because it's attempting to do a calculation, this is going to result in an error. And it's not going to be able to evaluate x plus y because x and y are of two different data types. It cannot add an integer and a string together. So that will result in an error. So be very careful when you're doing something like this.